Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from the 5th chapter in the book of Job. This is the first monologue, or speech rather, the beginning in the 3rd chapter. The book of Job becomes an exchange of monologues between Job and eventually 4 comforters, the first 3 of which are listed in 2:11. Eliphaz the Temanite is at the top of that list, so he's the oldest, the most elaborate, and arguably the most eloquent of these 3. And for the second time in 2 chapters, we witness him appeal to observation. And the problem with appealing to observation is human observation is so limited. So no one participating in this dialogue has any idea or premonition of the dialogue in the 1st chapter in heaven between Yahweh and Satan, where Satan submits to Yahweh a challenge that he will take away everything, that all Job's wealth, all Job's health, and he will curse him to his face, and a challenge which Yahweh accepts. So that is the purpose for which Job underwent the suffering that he was going through right now. And they all insisted, from the simplistic prism of an archaic theology, that cursings were the result of unrighteousness. Sometimes, cursings just have natural coincidences, and God doesn't have anything to do with it. That's because we're not privy. We weren't there when he laid the foundation of the earth or anything else. We do not know his ways. So the answer to the question is, who are you to question my ways, at the conclusion of the book. But he says, I myself have seen the fool taking root, but suddenly his home was cursed. Verse 3, so that's the second time, according to what I have seen, those who plow wickedness and sow suffering reap the same, in verse 8. Both of these are personal in direction against Job, because he had the lesson of a fool encountering wealth in its fleeting nature is, as expressed in Proverbs, is mimicked here. And this is why so many poor people who win the lottery end up broke, because they have no experience in managing money, so they just spend it all, and it doesn't last a lifetime for some of these people. But this is a reference to Job, who had just recently lost his wealth and his health. For evil does not come from the dust, nor does trouble spring from the ground. For man is born for trouble, and the sparks fly upward. Evil does not come from the dust. It is an intensely personal force. There is no love in the universe apart from people, any more than there is no evil or hatred or sin apart from people. So man is born for trouble. That means we were born sinners by nature and not by choice. And you don't have to go looking for trouble, especially in the day and age that we live in, for trouble to find you. But as for me, I would seek El, and I would submit my case to Elohim. And this opens the bursting of the doxology. So what we covered so far consists of 2 parts. There is the first half of the first third, rather. This is 17 through 27. I mean, you can do the math. Roughly a little over a third. But to return to the text itself, he says the number of good that he does, the good deeds that he does, are beyond measure, beyond number. He's the one who makes the rainfall from the sky to put lowly on high, and those who mourn shall be lifted to safety. This incidentally parallels one of the observations he references in the previous chapter of Job, who instructed many, made weak hands strong, raised up the stumbling, and strengthened the weak knees. And then, he thwarts the schemes of the crafty. They turn to dust and smithereens because he is wiser than any men who are wise in the ways of the world. Catching the wise in their own craftiness, and the counsel of schemers are swept away. So this is the only portion of Job which is quoted and repeated in the New Testament. First chapter of 1 Corinthians, when Paul is establishing the superiority of the wisdom of God, who uses the foolish people to confound the wise. you don't have a university education is no substitution for an experiential relational knowledge with divinity. And thus the poor have hope, and unrighteousness shuts their mouth. That's the concluding part of the passage we already covered. So the poor have hope, who from worshiping this great being who he's bursting out into doxology to, and then he turns away from the doxology and leads to personal application, I guess, to Job. Look, 17th verse, first verse, lesson itself. Look, blessed is the man to whom Elohim reproves, so do not despise the discipline of El Shaddai. So the first thing we need to get out of the way is that term El Shaddai appears 31 times in the book of Job. That's the first reference. It's the most frequently referenced term. It translates as God Almighty. So Almighty is an expression of his omnipotence. There's no limitation or imposition on the limits of his strength. He is all power, infinite, and unlimited. He has the attribute of omnipotence. And he's asking him now, the natural man, when he is disciplined, and this is communicated in Proverbs, it separates the fools from the wise. The wise people embrace discipline and are made wiser by it and learn from it. The fool just thinks about the pain and the depth, but they miss the whole meaning of the purpose of discipline. Discipline is an act of love, and everything that Yahweh is rooted in, and everything that he does is motivated by love. So he disciplines the one he loves, ergo we should not despise it. But the implicit assumption is a false accusation that Job is being disciplined, because he was not being disciplined. He was being tested. He hadn't done anything wrong. He had been reverential and upright his entire life, and he had served Yahweh faithfully. But Satan says, take away all his health and all his wealth, he'll curse you to his face. So he was being tested, and Satan is allowed to tempt us, but Yahweh, he only operates at the sovereign behest of Elohim, because Satan is not an omnipotent being. There are limitations imposed on him by Yahweh. Satan has strength, has weaknesses and limits. Yahweh has none. So he is El Shaddai, to bring it back to bring it back full circle. For he bruises, but he binds up. He smites, but his hands heal. So no matter how injured you are, no matter how fallen you are, no matter how sad, depressed, lonely, or just defeated by life you are, there is always redemption. There is theoretically infinite redemptive potential and infinite potential for improvement in every person. Theoretically, I say that. But he can, the world will wound us, but the word can heal us. The word is likened to wine in that it stings initially, but it ultimately heals. Wine was just about one of the most effective and painkillers in the ancient world. In 6 distresses he delivers you, and in 7 no evil strikes you. So that number alteration is not an uncommon device in ancient Hebrew literature. We witness this especially in the 30th chapter of Proverbs, where Agar says, 4 things continue to amaze me. And there's about 3 or 4 of the times that he does it. But the number 7 are indicated by the word will or shall in this not this translation, but in others. So the 7 things he says are the next 7 verses, and then he wraps it up with a concluding remark. In famine he shall redeem you from death, and in battle from the power of the sword. So this is the consequence and blessings of living by righteousness. All will go well. You will not starve, even though there is a famine. You will not perish. You will not. And in battle, no enemy can defeat you when you walk in his strength. That's when we can confidently proclaim with ironclad certainty the words of the prophet Isaiah, that no weapon formed against me shall prosper. But we have to know that we are walking in his power and not our own, because he is more powerful than any circumstance, enemy, or situation we can face, and we can overcome every single one of them through his grace and his power and his wisdom and his guidance. So we have to seek it out, as he advises him to do in the 8th verse. Seek El and submit my case to El. That is a challenge Job eventually does. He asked for his audience, and he would submit his innocence. And he's asking him to seek, and ye shall find. So don't turn to your pain. This is actually useful advice. There is useful advice, but there's a lot of harmful advice and bad, inaccurately, overly simplistic theologies in their philosophies and outlooks. Job's 3 comforters. When the tongue scourges, you are shielded, and you have no fear when destruction comes. So once more, no weapon against me shall prosper. Whether it's the tongue's words are weapons. They can be used to injure. They can also be used to bind the wounds or make the wounds, the binding up the wounds, to take it back to the 18th verse, and healing every injured object. But no words or weapons will injure you when you are truly walking in his ways. And one of the things I've taught myself to do is just to not take every negative thing that's ever said about me personally. What I do is I look if there is any character flaw that their criticism exposes, and then I silently or thank them for it. But if they're just insulting me, saying nothing original, I also just, who cares, let it slide. It makes the Christian life a lot easier when you don't take offense to begin with, because if I had to forgive everyone who said a negative thing about me, I would not have time to forgive the weightier matters of or giving forgiveness. I'd be more worried about getting forgiveness than giving forgiveness. We want to be, it is more blessed to give than it is to receive. Acts 20:35. At destruction and at starvation you laugh, and you have no fear of the beast of the earth. So know even the potentiality and possibility of destruction and starvation. This is the 3rd of the 7th thing, that those who are righteous will be delivered and have no evil stricken against them. So destruction and starvation, these are terrible, terrible things that we ought to take seriously. We shouldn't laugh at destruction or starvation, because the fact of its proliferation throughout the human species should draw us to tears when we realize that half the world lives on less than $2 a day. Half of the world's legitimate concern is eating. I mean, for a lot of people out there, they don't have it as well as we do. And but fear of the beast of the earth, this would have been more prominent to ancient rural dwellers than to modern city dwellers. But animals, we still retain a fear from them if we are in their presence. Eye of a lion or eye of a tiger is going to make even the city dweller, especially the city dweller who has no experience encountering them, fearful. But if you are truly walking in the ways and will of the Father, he will protect you, is what Eliphaz is trying to say. And that's true in principle, but it's not a promise. It's not an ironclad guarantee that we are not guaranteed everything that, that unless explicitly indicated that it is a promise. We shouldn't interpret principles as promises. For your covenant is with the stones of the field, and the beast of the field shall be at peace with you. So the beast of the field, these are wild animals or domesticated anyway. They're going to be at peace with you. They're not going to rebel against you. They're not going to kick you in your shins when you're not looking. And the term covenant with the stones of the field, that means none of them are going to fall upon you. You have a covenant is a geopolitical term originally. It dictated before it became a theological one and is more familiar as the latter, but in the ancient terminology, ancient Near East, a covenant was an arrangement or agreement governing the relationships between a superior strength and force and the weaker relationships. And because Yahweh initiates it, that takes on another dimension to the word covenant. But you will have the strength over the stones of the field in order to your covenant that's spoken as, implicitly your own, and not the stones, but the stones of the field. You have the understanding between them. You have the power over them that they will not crush and kill you. And you know that your tent is at peace, and you shall visit your tent and not sin. So tent can mean a literal tent. It can also mean a home. That is how the Israelites of the Exodus generation lived in. They lived in tents in the desert, being fed by manna while they wandered for 40 years. But tent, to have a peace in home, to have the peace in your home, that means no contention, no conflict, no drama between you and whoever else lives there. And you don't bring the sin into your home. You don't, for a parent to set a sinful example to a child will have tragic, devastating, destructive consequences. So that is the key to maintaining peace in our homes, and as Eliphaz suggests, walking in the strength and mind and will and power of the Almighty, El Shaddai. And you shall know that your seed are many, and your offspring like grass of the earth. So interesting bit of trivia. I hesitate to use the word trivia because everything in the Bible is significant, but Job antedates the writing of Genesis. The writing of Job, we don't know who wrote it. It probably wasn't Job because they didn't have access to Job didn't have access unless it was revealed to him, but it's not explicitly indicated in the text, and there is no authorial attribution in the text itself, but it can be dated to the patriarchal era, the writing thereof. This is pre-Mosaic. But the phrase grass of the earth, your seed, whether the grass of the earth, sand of the sea, or the stars of the sky, I believe is what he told Abram and eventually Abraham in Genesis. But he, for a lot of the theology and expressions of the three comforters correspond and align to much of what we read of throughout the Old Testament. So that phrase means that you're gonna to have children and grandchildren especially, and live to see grandchildren was the greatest blessing obtainable or possible according to the ancient ancient Israelite mindset. These were Edomites though, so they were not quite Israelites, but they were close. They were a Semitic people, and they had a relationship and knowledge of the single and true Almighty. So they were probably not that far removed from Esau, because eventually the Edomites succumbed to idolatry and polytheism, I believe. You shall not come to the grave in ripe old age, like the stacking of grain in its season. So this is the seventh thing that he's appealing to observation, or in principle, the things that you will be delivered from. You're going to live a long life, following the covenant path, the path of righteousness, the straight and narrow way to salvation. Doesn't automatically or guarantee that you will add life to your years, but it will add years to your life. So the blessing is qualitative, not necessarily quantitative, but in principle it is it's in principle, but there's nothing automatic or universal about that principle. And 27th and final verse, this is his conclusion of his intake. This concludes the first speech of Eliphaz the Temanite, which spans the range of 2 chapters in response to Job's single 3rd chapter. And he accomplishes a lot of things in this. For one, he gets them to start thinking about they're struggling to make sense of why Job is suffering, but these three comforters, Job is struggling. These three comforters are there to try and assist him, but they're not the most comforting comforters. They don't exactly have empathy. They falsely accuse him of having sinned in secret, and he's saying, if you confess it and forsake it, you will be restored. Look, this we have searched out. It is so. Hear it and know for yourself. So he has searched it out. This is the product of research, observation. When you research something, you search it repeatedly. That's where the prefix re comes in search. So it is searching over and over again. And this is the conclusion that his research from observation brings. He appeals to the lens of experience, and he's moving it to an application to Job. So he also claims in the 4th chapter tail end that he was blessed with, he was the recipient of a revelation, a dream at night, a visitation of a spirit. He doesn't leave us so much more, and it could be one of two spirits, but that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.